Hello, my name is Lucy, and welcome to the Great Battles of History podcast. This being my first episode, I would like to thank a few special people. I have always loved military history podcasts. My inspiration for this came from my two favorite podcasts, the History of Rome and Military History podcast, so thank you to Mike Duncan and George Hagerman. Today I will have a lot of information about this podcast to get through, so please bear with me. First of all, I will not be able to upload episodes on a regular time frame. I have homework to deal with, so I will upload more episodes when I am out of school. Second, I do not use social media, so I have created a website for my podcast. Please go to greatbattlespodcast.weebly.com. Again, that is greatbattlespodcast.weebly.com to support the podcast. Every episode, I will talk about a battle that I find interesting, but probably not about battles that a lot of people already know about, like Gettysburg and the storming of the beaches of Normandy. Instead, I will use battles like the Battle of Hampton Roads and the Battle of Cannae. You can go to my website if you have suggestions for the battles I should do. And now, back to our regularly scheduled podcast. The Battle of Hampton Roads was a lesser-known battle of the Civil War. I have always found it very interesting, and I made a poster on it in 5th grade. I'm going to post a picture of the poster on my website. When the Civil War began, the Navy stayed with the Union. They blockaded Confederate ports with devastating effects. The North also held advantages in resources, railroads, and industry, so the South had no hope of building a navy equal to what the North had. Instead, they had to use innovation to create a ship that could single-handedly destroy the Union Navy. The Confederacy began by salvaging what they could of a ship called the Uss Merrimack that had been sunk previously. They added iron armor to repel cannonballs and holes for cannons. The Merrimack was often called a floating barn because of its shape, which was weird for the time. It was nothing like an ordinary wooden boat of the 1800s. Instead, its sloped sides converged at a flat top, out of which a smokestack protruded. This was the silo of a floating barn. And here, I would like to pause to mention the crazy name game that went on with this ship. It was called the USS Merrimack, Merrimack, though it was often misspelled, and still is today, as the Merrimack with no K at the end. The Union burned the Merrimack when it was retreating from Virginia, so it would not fall into the wrong hands. However, the Confederacy salvaged it, rebuilt it with iron, and renamed it the CSS Virginia. However, many people still called it the Merrimack. You got all that? Good. The Merrimack, which is the name I will use, arrived at Hampton Roads where several Union ships were docked on March 8, 1862. It proceeded to sink the USS Cumberland and the USS Congress. Night fell before it could sink the USS Minnesota, so the commander, Franklin Buchanan, decided to finish the job the next morning. The crew aboard the Merrimack did not know that the Union was sending their own ironclad ship into battle. The Uss Monitor was designed by Swedish engineer John Ericsson, whose great ideas included a better, more protected propeller design and flushable ship toilets. Ericsson even planned to equip the Monitor with an early version of torpedoes, but this idea was scrapped in the rush to build the ship. The Monitor was often referred to as a cheese box on a raft, because its deck just barely floated higher than the water, and on top of it was a rotating turret housing the Monitor's cannon. This was the cheese box. On March 9th, the crew of the Merrimack woke up to an unfortunate surprise. The Monitor was ready to protect the USS Minnesota from attack. Soon, the Monitor and Merrimack got close to each other and started firing. However, since both ships were made of iron, not much direct damage was caused. Instead, the ships were dented. The slow Merrimack soon found that it was hard to aim at the fast-moving and maneuverable Monitor. The Monitor also had trouble because there was no way to get a good view of where the cannons were firing. Also, the turret turned too freely, so the guns were hard to aim. The Monitor's crew responded to this by simply firing randomly, turning the turret back to load, and then firing it randomly again. This stopped them from winning because they could not concentrate their force in the damaged spots of the Merrimack. The Monitor also missed the Achilles heel of the Merrimack, the unprotected wooden hull. Soon, the Merrimack ran aground. The Monitor could go much shallower than the Merrimack. The Monitor began circling the Merrimack and continuously fired at it. However, after overpressurizing the boilers, the captain of the Merrimack was able to get it back out onto open water to continue the battle. It was not too damaged to fight. The Merrimack then decided to ram the Monitor. The crew did not know that the ram on the front of the ship had been broken off. The Merrimack hit its opponent head-on, but the Monitor sustained no damage. The Merrimack soon developed a small leak in the hull. In a couple of hours, the Monitor's turret ran out of ammunition. There was plenty of ammo below decks, but the turret would have to stop turning to align the two hatches so the ammo could be moved up. The officers on the Monitor were afraid that the stationary turret would be a sitting duck for the Confederate cannons. The Monitor temporarily pulled out of the battle to transport the ammunition to the turret. Later, the Monitor tried to ram the Merrimack, but the steering malfunctioned. It missed its target and kept going. This was when Worden, the captain of the Monitor, was injured by a shell that exploded in his face, temporarily blinding him. By the time the ship turned around, it was in water much too shallow for the Merrimack. The Merrimack thought that the Monitor was either retreating or trying to lure them into shallow water. The Confederates retreated, as the tide would soon be too low to cross the sandbar. This great battle simply ended in a confused stalemate. After the Battle of Hampton Roads, the missions of both ships were stalled. Any attempt to act with ironclads would now be stopped by ironclads. So, this is just a little, tiny, unimportant naval battle of the Civil War, right? It didn't have any long-term effects, right? Wrong. This battle was a milestone in the conversion from wood to metal ships. Wooden battleships became obsolete as the world adopted ironclads. Many more ironclads were built for the war, and Russia also began construction of similar ships. This proof of iron's strength revolutionized naval warfare. That is why the Battle of Hampton Roads is a great battle of history. Thank you for listening.